The meticulous lawns of Willow Creek Estates stretched out like emerald carpets under the relentless California sun. Every rose bush trimmed to precise specifications, every mailbox gleaming, every driveway a pristine slab of charcoal gray or muted tan. It was a haven of manufactured tranquility, a gilded cage that Sarah had, until recently, considered her sanctuary. She'd poured every spare cent, every ounce of sweat equity, into making the modest bungalow at 142 Sycamore Lane her own. Its quaint charm, the sun-drenched kitchen, the sprawling backyard where her golden retriever Baxter chased squirrels with an unbridled joy, had all promised a fresh start, a life free from the suffocating pressures of the city and the echoes of a past she was desperate to outrun. But Willow Creek Estates had a queen, and her name was Evelyn Albright. Mrs. Albright, HOA president, a woman whose smile never quite reached her eyes and whose perfectly coiffed silver hair seemed impervious to even the strongest Santa Ana winds, ruled with an iron fist clad in a white lace glove. She was the architect of Willow Creek's perfection and its most fervent enforcer. Sarah, having lived there for barely 18 months, had already received 3 polite but firm notices, one about the precise shade of exterior paint required, another regarding Baxter's excessive barking, a subjective assessment, Sarah thought, given his enthusiasm for the mailman, and a third about an unsanctioned garden gnome. Each interaction, though minor, chipped away at her sense of autonomy, a subtle reminder that her home, while legally hers, was ultimately subject to the collective, unyielding will of the Homeowners Association. The latest dictate had arrived, in a glossy brochure, slid under her door like a sinister advertisement. Community-wide infrastructure upgrade, enhanced fiber optic network and drainage modernization. It promised faster internet, fewer puddles, and a seamless transition for all residents. The accompanying letter, signed by Mrs. Albright herself, assured everyone that the necessary disruptions would be minimal and temporary. At the last HOA meeting, held in the impeccably decorated community clubhouse, Mrs. Albright had projected a slideshow of smiling, hard-hatted workers and pristine, newly laid pipes. Her voice, smooth as polished marble, had resonated with authority. "This is a vital investment in our collective future," she'd declared, her gaze sweeping the room, lingering just a fraction too long on anyone who dared to fidget. A small inconvenience for long-term prosperity and enhanced property values. Sarah had sat in the back, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. She'd seen the plans. The fiber optic lines were slated to run along the street, but the drainage improvements, she noted with a pang, were marked directly through the driveways. "Won't that be a massive undertaking?" she'd whispered to her neighbor, Martha, a sweet, perpetually flustered woman who had lived in Willow Creek for decades. Martha had patted her hand. "Oh, honey, the HOA hires the best. They'll patch it right up. You won't even know they were here." Martha's words were meant to be reassuring, but they carried a hint of resignation, the weary acceptance of a longtime resident who knew the futility of resistance. Sarah had tried to push the apprehension aside. Martha was right. They hired the best. What could go wrong? What could go wrong? Everything, it turned out. The first day, the contractors descended like a swarm of locusts. Monstrous yellow excavators, dump trucks groaning under the weight of their loads, and a cacophony of jackhammers shattered the morning calm. Willow Creek Estates, usually hushed save for the chirping of birds and the occasional whir of a lawnmower, became an industrial battlefield. The air, usually redolent with the scent of jasmine and freshly cut grass, now tasted of dust and diesel fumes. Sarah found herself retreating indoors, the vibrations from the heavy machinery rattling her windows and her nerves. Baxter, normally a fearless guardian of the property, cowered under the kitchen table, whimpering. For 2 weeks, her street was an obstacle course of orange cones, caution tape, and deep, open trenches. Her once smooth driveway became a narrow, precarious path of uneven gravel and temporary metal plates. Each morning, she navigated it with trepidation, praying her tires wouldn't snag on a loose plate or slip into a muddy rut. The workers, grim-faced and efficient, communicated mostly in grunts and hand signals. They were polite enough, but their answers to her questions about the timeline or the depth of the digging were vague, always pointing her back to the HOA. "Just following orders, ma'am." One burly man with a permanent layer of dust on his brow had grunted, wiping sweat from his forehead. "HOA's in charge." Then came Tuesday, a day seared into Sarah's memory as the day the ground opened up. It was mid-morning. Sarah was in her home office, trying to concentrate on a client brief, but the insistent thud-thud-thud of the excavator was making focus impossible. Suddenly, a sound unlike any she'd heard before ripped through the air. A guttural, tearing groan, followed by a deafening crack that reverberated through the very foundations of her house. It wasn't the rhythmic pounding she'd grown accustomed to. This was sharp, violent, conclusive. Baxter, startled, erupted from his napping spot, barking furiously. Sarah's heart leaped into her throat. She sprang from her chair, rushing to the front window. What she saw froze the blood in her veins. Where her neat, gray-tiled driveway had been, a monstrous, jagged crater now gaped. The excavator, its massive arm still poised, seemed to be staring into the abyss it had just created. Chunks of concrete, rebar twisted like grotesque metal vines, and pulverized asphalt lay scattered around the gaping wound. The workers, who, moments before, had been a blur of activity, stood motionless, their hard hats tipped back, staring into the pit with an air of stunned disbelief. It wasn't a crack. It wasn't a pothole. It was a hole. A giant, gaping maw, easily 6 feet wide. And God knew how deep, its edges raw and torn, revealing dark, wet earth beneath. A shudder ran through Sarah's body. The fresh start, the sanctuary, the meticulously crafted life. It all felt like it was tumbling into that terrifying void. She ran outside, barefoot, oblivious to the sharp debris underfoot, Baxter barking frantically at her heels. "What happened?" she shrieked, her voice thin and reedy against the sudden, eerie silence of the machinery. One of the workers, a younger man, ran a hand through his hair, his face pale beneath the grime. "Ma'am, we hit something. Something hard. And then the ground just gave way. We didn't expect it." He gestured vaguely at the earth, as if blaming the very soil. "Could be an old pipe, maybe some unstable fill. It just collapsed." Sarah stared at the abyss that swallowed a significant portion of her driveway, stretching almost to her garage door. "Collapsed? My driveway just collapsed, but you were digging around it, right? Not under it?" The foreman, a heavy-set man named Miller, approached, his face unreadable. "Look, ma'am, accidents happen. We were following the schematics for the new drainage. There must have been a weakness in the substructure. Probably wasn't up to code when it was laid down originally." "Not up to code?" Sarah echoed, incredulous. "I just had this house inspected when I bought it. The driveway was perfectly fine." "Well, now it's not," Miller stated flatly, his eyes avoiding hers. "We'll cordon it off. You won't be able to use your garage until it's fixed." "Fixed?" Sarah's voice rose to a desperate pitch. "You fixed it! Your machine did this! You're going to fix it, right? Immediately?" She looked from the monstrous hole to the impassive faces of the workers, a creeping dread beginning to snake around her heart. Miller sighed, pulling out a walkie-talkie. "I'll call the HOA. They'll advise on next steps." He spoke into the device, his voice low, his words indistinguishable to Sarah. He never once made eye contact. The next few hours were a blur of phone calls and growing frustration. Sarah tried to reach Mrs. Albright directly, but was shunted to an HOA administrative assistant who sounded perpetually bored. All work is being handled by our approved contractors, Ms. Jensen. Any claims or issues must be submitted in writing." "In writing?" Sarah yelled into the phone, her voice shaking. "There's a 6-foot hole in my driveway. I can't even get my car out of the garage." "We understand this is an inconvenience, Ms. Jensen," the assistant droned, "but procedures must be followed. A representative will be out within 24 to 48 hours to assess the damage. In the meantime, please avoid the damaged area for your safety." Avoid the damaged area? It was her driveway, the very path to her home. A representative did arrive precisely 47 hours later. It wasn't Mrs. Albright, but a stern-faced man in a crisp suit carrying a clipboard and a laser measuring tool. He introduced himself as Mr. Harrison, a consultant from the HOA's legal department. He barely acknowledged Sarah, instead circling the crater, muttering into a small recorder, taking measurements and snapping photos with an expensive-looking camera. He peered into the depths of the hole, his brow furrowed, then scribbled notes. Sarah, her patience worn thin, finally exploded. "Well, what's the plan? When are your contractors coming back to fix it? I need to use my garage. This is a nightmare." Mr. Harrison finally looked at her, his expression devoid of empathy. "Ms. Jensen, our preliminary assessment indicates that the damage to your driveway is not a direct result of the ongoing infrastructure project." Sarah stared, dumbfounded. "What? What are you talking about? Your excavator." The crumpled HOA letter felt like a brand burned into Sarah's palm. $50 a day, a lien on her property. The audacity of it pulsed through her veins, a raw, hot fury. She wasn't a fighter by nature, her preferred mode of conflict. Resolution was avoidance, a quiet retreat from confrontation. But Willow Creek Estates, and particularly Evelyn Albright, had systematically eroded that comfort, pushing her to a precipice she never imagined she'd reach. This wasn't just a driveway. It was her independence, her security, her very right to peace in her own home. The next morning, Sarah woke with a grim determination. Baxter, sensing the shift in her mood, stayed close, his golden fur a warm comfort, against her leg. The first step was research. She needed facts, leverage. The HOA's legal department, Mr. Harrison, and Clause 7.3b, they all seemed so unassailable. But there had to be a weakness, a loophole, a regulation they were overlooking or abusing. She started with Willow Creek Estate's original development, plans. If the HOA claimed a pre-existing structural weakness, she wanted to see the proof. She spent hours online, navigating arcane county planning department websites, poring over digitized blueprints. The original subdivision plans, filed decades ago, showed standard utility easements running along the streets, but nothing indicating a major drainage project or deep excavation through individual driveways as part of the initial infrastructure. The current project was an upgrade, not a pre-existing condition. This small detail, a flicker of hope, sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. Her next target was the contractor. "Just following orders, ma'am," the burly worker had said. Whose orders? She found the name of the construction company, Summit Excavation, listed on the HOA brochure. Their website was slick, professional, showcasing impressive machinery and boasts of precision engineering. A quick search revealed a few local news articles about Summit, mostly positive, but one buried piece from 5 years prior mentioned a minor lawsuit over property damage during a commercial build, settled out. Of court, not a smoking gun, but a hint that they weren't infallible. She called Summit Excavation. The receptionist, a chipper voice, put her through to a project manager. "Mr. Davies, Sarah Jensen, you're handling the Willow Creek Estates project. Your team, specifically an excavator, dug a massive hole in my driveway." She spoke calmly, deliberately, suppressing the tremor in her voice. Mr. Davies was evasive. "Ms. Jensen, all site operations are conducted under the strict supervision of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. Any inquiries regarding Liability or damage claims must go through them. Your foreman, a Mr. Miller, said you hit something, Sarah pressed. He implied there was a pre-existing weakness. What exactly did you hit? Was it a pipe? A rock? Did you do a ground-penetrating radar scan before starting this phase of the project? A pause. A subtle shift in Mr. Davies's tone. Ma'am, our teams follow all safety protocols. We rely on the provided schematics and ground surveys. If there was an anomaly, it was unforeseen. This is precisely why such contracts include clauses regarding unforeseen subsurface conditions. And who pays for unforeseen subsurface conditions when your equipment caused the damage? Sarah asked, her voice rising slightly. That, Mr. Davies said, his voice now clipped, is a matter for the HOA, Ms. Jensen. Good day. The line went dead. Sarah slammed the phone down. They were all in lockstep, a solid wall of denial. This wasn't just carelessness. It was a cover-up. They knew they were liable, and they were using the HOA's draconian rules to push the cost onto her. Her next move was more personal. She walked over to Martha's house. This time, she wasn't asking for sympathy. She was looking for information. Martha opened the door, her eyes wide with concern. "Oh, Sarah, dear, I heard. It's just awful, isn't it? That whole—" "Martha, who is Evelyn Albright really?" Sarah asked, cutting to the chase. "How did she become so powerful here?" Martha wrung her hands. "Well, she's been president for, 15 years at least. Her husband was one of the original developers of Willow Creek. He passed years ago, but she knows everything about this place. Every pipe, every wire. She knows the rules better than anyone, and she's very organized." "Organized isn't the word I'd use," Sarah muttered. "More like tyrannical. Have there been other incidents like this, where the HOA's contractors caused damage and they made the homeowner pay?" Martha looked uncomfortable. She glanced around her living room as if afraid the walls might have ears. "Well, there was the time they replaced the main water line along Maple Street. Old Mr. Henderson's sprinkler system got busted up pretty bad. The HOA said it was faulty pipes on his end, not their heavy equipment. He fought it for a bit, but he's an older gentleman, and he just paid up in the end, said it wasn't worth the stress." "What about legal action?" Sarah pressed. "Has anyone ever sued the HOA and won?" Martha shook her head sadly. "Not that I know of. Evelyn has the HOA's lawyers on speed dial. They're very good. They always win." She lowered her voice. "People here, they just don't want trouble." "Willow Creek is beautiful, Sarah. Quiet. Everyone just wants to keep it that way. And Evelyn, she makes sure it stays quiet." Martha's words were a warning, a subtle plea for Sarah to back down, but they only hardened Sarah's resolve. That evening, a local attorney specializing in HOA disputes finally returned her call. His name was Daniel Chen, and his voice was surprisingly young but confident. Sarah explained the situation, her voice growing more impassioned with each detail. "They excavated near your property line for their project, hit something, and then claimed—" "Your driveway had a pre-existing weakness?" Daniel asked, a note of skepticism in his voice. "And they're fining you and threatening a lien?" "Exactly," Sarah said, relief washing over her that someone finally understood the outrageousness of it. "Ms. Jensen, this sounds like a classic case of dig and deny," Daniel said. "HOAs often try to shift liability, especially when their contractors screw up. The burden of proof would be on them to demonstrate that your driveway was structurally unsound before their intervention. And even then, their contractors have a duty of care. If they knew or should have known about a potential issue, they have a responsibility to take precautions." "So I have a case?" Sarah asked, hope flickering. "You certainly have grounds for a dispute," Daniel confirmed. "However, fighting an HOA, especially one with deep pockets and a history of winning, is a protracted and expensive process. Are you prepared for that?" Sarah looked out at the dark, gaping hole that had consumed her peace of mind. "I don't think I have a choice, Daniel. They're threatening my home." "All right," Daniel said, his tone turning more serious. "First, do not pay anything. Do not sign anything. Send a formal letter, certified mail, to the HOA stating that you dispute their claim of liability and that you consider them responsible for the damage. Outline the timeline of events. Also, request all documentation related to the infrastructure project, including engineering reports, ground surveys, and the contract with Summit Excavation. Specifically, ask for any pre-excavation reports related to your property or immediate vicinity." "Pre-excavation reports?" Mr. Davies implied they didn't have any detailed ones, Sarah recalled. "Exactly," Daniel said. "If they didn't conduct proper surveys, that strengthens your case. It shows negligence, and they will likely refuse to provide anything that incriminates them. That's where we come in. We can subpoena those documents." Over the next few days, Sarah followed Daniel's instructions. The formal letter to the HOA was a carefully worded masterpiece of legal boilerplate, devoid of emotion, filled with facts and demands for documentation. Sending it felt like throwing down a gauntlet. The very act of taking control, of fighting back, made her feel less like a victim. A week passed. No response from the HOA. The gaping hole in her driveway remained, a constant ugly reminder. She had to park her car on the street, exposing it to the elements and occasional ding from passing cars. The fines, $50 a day, were accruing. The thought gnawed at her, but Daniel had explicitly told her not to pay. Then one morning, a glossy, impeccably printed leaflet appeared in her mailbox. It was an invitation to the Willow Creek Estate's annual summer gala, a black tie event at the community clubhouse, with Mrs. Albright listed as the hostess. Beneath the details, a subtle but unmistakable line read, "All outstanding HOA fees must be reconciled by the event date to ensure participation in community functions." It wasn't explicitly about her fines, but the timing felt like a deliberate jab, a public shaming tactic. Sarah scoffed. Participation in community functions? The only function she cared about was getting her driveway fixed and the HOA off her back. The next day, a flurry of activity erupted on her street. Not Summit Excavation, but a smaller local landscaping crew hired by a different neighbor, Ms. Albright's closest confidant, Mrs. Peterson. They were planting a new rose garden along Mrs. Peterson's fence line, directly opposite Sarah's house. Mrs. Peterson, a woman known for her meticulously manicured fingernails and even more meticulously maintained gossip network, was overseeing the work with an eagle eye, occasionally casting pointed glances towards Sarah's driveway. Sarah tried to ignore them, but as the day progressed, she noticed something unsettling. The landscapers, while digging shallow beds for the roses, were also making subtle. The image of the massive rusted concrete pipe, illuminated by her phone's weak beam, was etched into Sarah's mind. It was the smoking gun, the definitive proof that the HOA's narrative was a meticulously crafted lie. The fury that had simmered within her now erupted into a focused, chilling resolve. This wasn't just about money. It was about exposing a deeper deception, a corporate deceit that threatened not just her property, but potentially the safety of every home built over that decaying underground behemoth. She called Daniel Chen the moment the sun began to paint the eastern sky. His voice, usually composed, took on a note of stunned disbelief as Sarah recounted her discovery, her words tumbling out in a rush of adrenaline. She described the county archive map, the decommissioned label, and finally, the undeniable visual. Evidence she'd captured with her phone camera, the ancient pipe's exposed curve in the depths of her driveway crater. "Ms. Jensen, this is significant," Daniel said, his voice laced with awe. "This changes everything. If that storm drain was decommissioned but not properly removed or filled, and the HOA knew or should have known, their liability isn't just about negligence. It's potentially about a deliberate cover-up of a major structural hazard. This shifts the playing field entirely. "So, what do we do?" Sarah asked, a tremor of excitement mixed with apprehension in her voice. "We can't just go public, can we?" "Not yet." "No, not yet," Daniel agreed. "We need to hit them where it hurts, privately first. We will send a new letter to the HOA. This one won't be a dispute. This one will be a formal notice of intent to sue, backed by irrefutable evidence of their knowledge of a pre-existing derelict municipal structure under your property and their failure to disclose or mitigate it during their current excavation. We'll demand they cease all fines, immediately remediate the damage at their cost, and compensate you for the inconvenience and potential depreciation." "And if they refuse?" Sarah asked, already knowing the answer. "Then we file a lawsuit," Daniel said grimly. "And we make sure this becomes very public. This is no longer just about your driveway, Ms. Jensen. This is about accountability for potentially endangering an entire community." Over the next 2 days, Daniel and his team worked swiftly. The new letter, drafted with precision and loaded with legal firepower, landed on Evelyn Albright's desk via certified mail. It wasn't just a threat. It was a dossier. It contained copies of the 1950s county map, highlighted sections of municipal codes regarding decommissioned infrastructure, and printed photographs of the exposed pipe in Sarah's driveway, date and time stamped. It concluded with a demand for immediate action and a clear ultimatum: resolve this amicably within 7 days, or face a lawsuit for negligence, fraud, and endangerment to be filed in Superior Court. The silence that followed was unnerving. Sarah expected an immediate, furious response from Evelyn Albright, a denial, a counter-threat. Instead, there was nothing. No phone calls, no more cryptic flyers in her mailbox, no sign of Mrs. Peterson peering from behind her reinforced rose bushes. It was the calm before the storm, a pregnant pause that heightened Sarah's anxiety more than any direct confrontation. The only thing that continued was the relentless daily fines, quietly ticking up in the HOA's ledger. On the 3rd day, a white van with Willow Creek Estates maintenance emblazoned on its side pulled up to Sarah's driveway. 2 uniformed men got out. Sarah watched them from her window, a knot of apprehension tightening in her stomach. They didn't have shovels or surveying equipment. Instead, one carried a large, professional-looking camera, the other a tablet. They approached the hole cautiously, snapped several photos, then leaned over, peering intently into its depths. They spoke in hushed tones, occasionally pointing. One of them pulled out a long, flexible measuring tape and lowered it into the abyss. They were assessing the pipe. The HOA was reacting. Suddenly, the man with the camera looked up, his eyes sweeping Sarah's house. He caught her watching from the window. He didn't smile, didn't wave, just held her gaze for a beat too long, an unreadable expression on his face, before turning back to his colleague. They finished their assessment swiftly, hopped back into their van, and drove away, leaving Sarah more on edge than before. The silence of their visit was more ominous than any verbal threat. The next day, a formal, terse email arrived from the HOA's legal counsel, not Evelyn Albright. It acknowledged receipt of Daniel's letter and stated, "The board is currently reviewing the information provided and will convene a special meeting to discuss the matter. You will be contacted regarding their decision within the stipulated time frame." The email was cold, impersonal, but the fact that they were reviewing and convening a special meeting was a small victory. It meant they were taking her seriously. On the 6th day, just before the 7-day deadline Daniel had set, Sarah received a phone call. It was Evelyn Albright. Sarah's hand trembled as she answered, steeling herself. "Ms. Jensen," Evelyn's voice was, as always, meticulously composed, but Sarah detected a faint, almost imperceptible tremor, a tight edge that hadn't been there before. I understand you have some concerns regarding the recent infrastructure project. Concerns? Sarah scoffed, unable to keep the sarcasm from her voice. Mrs. Albright, there's a giant, dangerous hole in my driveway, and you're trying to make me pay for a problem caused by your contractors hitting a derelict, unmarked municipal storm drain that your organization should have known about. Concerns is a mild understatement. A beat of silence. Ms. Jensen, the association is fully committed to the safety and well-being of its residents. We were, of course, unaware of any such abandoned municipal structure beneath the property. The original development plans provided to us by the builders did not indicate any such feature. This is a highly unusual and unforeseen circumstance. Unforeseen by whom? Sarah countered, her voice gaining strength. The county archives show the map. A simple search, a proper pre-excavation survey, would have revealed it. Your contractors hid it, and now you're trying to cover it up and fine me for it. Evelyn cleared her throat. We are prepared to offer a compromise, Ms. Jensen. Given the unforeseen nature of this situation and our desire to maintain harmonious community relations, the HOA will absorb 50% of the repair costs for your driveway. We will also waive all accrued fines to date. This is a substantial offer, considering our legal position remains that this was a pre-existing condition on your property. Sarah felt a surge of triumph, quickly followed by a cold, hard resolve. 50%? This was an admission of guilt, a desperate attempt to make her go away, but it wasn't enough. Not after everything, not after the fines, the threats, the lies. No, Mrs. Albright, Sarah said, her voice firm, unwavering. I will not accept 50%. The HOA and its contractors are 100% liable for this. You will cover all repair costs, immediately cease all fines, and compensate me for the inconvenience. And I expect a formal apology. Another longer silence. Sarah could almost hear Evelyn Albright's perfectly manicured fingers drumming against a polished desk, her mind racing. Ms. Jensen, you are being unreasonable. We have legal counsel who are very confident in our position. This offer is extraordinarily generous. And my legal counsel is very confident in my position, Sarah shot back. More confident than ever, now that we have photographic proof of your unforeseen circumstance. If you refuse to accept full liability, then Daniel will file the lawsuit first thing tomorrow morning. And I assure you, Mrs. Albright, when the press gets wind of the Willow Creek Estates HOA, led by its long-standing president, covering up a dangerous, derelict, buried municipal storm drain that your contractors just ruptured, it will be a far greater inconvenience than any of us anticipated. The threat hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Sarah could almost feel Evelyn Albright's composure cracking on the other end of the line. The thought of Willow Creek Estates, Evelyn's meticulously crafted paradise, being exposed as a hazardous, deceitful environment to the wider public, it was her ultimate nightmare. Ms. Jensen, Evelyn said, her voice strained, the veneer of control finally slipping. This is blackmail. No, Mrs. Albright, Sarah corrected her, her voice now calm, deliberate, infused with the power of truth. This is justice. The line went dead. Sarah stood for a moment, the phone still pressed to her ear, a faint smile playing on her lips. She had done it. She had called their bluff. The fear had finally subsided, replaced by a quiet, fierce satisfaction. She looked out at the gaping hole in her driveway, no longer a symbol of her helplessness, but a monument to her unexpected strength. An hour later, her phone rang again. It was Daniel. Sarah, he said, a note of triumph in his voice. Just got off the phone with the HOA's lawyer. They're conceding. Full repair, all fines waived, and they're offering a small settlement for the inconvenience. They want a signed non-disclosure agreement, of course, but it's a full capitulation on the core issue. Congratulations! You won! Sarah leaned against the wall, a wave of exhaustion and relief washing over her. She won. She had actually won. But as the initial euphoria faded, a new thought, colder and more unsettling, began to take root. They had conceded on her driveway. But what about the other residents? What about the other properties built over that forgotten fragile pipe? The hum of new machinery was a stark contrast to the destructive roar that had ripped through Sarah's driveway weeks ago. This time the sounds were constructive, the rhythmic thud of fresh concrete being poured, the whir of trowels smoothing the surface, the low murmur of workers' voices. The HOA, true to their forced concession, had dispatched a new, larger, and far more professional crew. They worked with a quiet efficiency, seemingly eager to erase the gaping scar from Willow Creek's pristine facade. Sarah watched from her window, a complex mix of triumph and unease churning within her. Her driveway was being fixed, the immediate crisis averted. Yet, the non-disclosure agreement, signed under duress, felt like a gag order, a heavy cloak thrown over the truth. Evelyn Albright remained conspicuously absent. She didn't call, didn't send a personal apology. All communication from the HOA came through their legal counsel, cold and corporate. It was a victory, but a silent one, tasted only in the privacy of her home. The daily fines had ceased, and a modest sum had appeared in her bank account for inconvenience. But the moral victory felt hollowed out by the silence she was forced to maintain. Her restored driveway, gleaming under the sun, was a symbol of her resilience, but also a monument to the HOA's powerful secrecy. She couldn't speak about the decommissioned storm drain, not to Martha, not to any other neighbor. The thought gnawed at her. What if the pipe, now exposed and resealed under her property, decided to give way under someone else's? The danger wasn't gone, it was simply reburied. Evelyn Albright, however, was not one to forget or forgive, though she remained out of direct contact. Sarah felt her presence, a subtle shift in the neighborhood's atmosphere. The HOA's administrative assistant, usually efficient, became vaguely unhelpful when Sarah called about a minor landscaping inquiry. Her junk mail increased, filled with flyers for competing lawn services and pest control companies, almost as if her own service providers had been subtly undermined. Then came the courtesy notice about Baxter's barking, citing multiple complaints. A familiar tactic, but now tinged with a sharper malice. It was harassment, calculated and insidious, designed to remind Sarah who truly held the reins in Willow Creek. The ultimate jab came a month after her driveway was fully restored. A formal letter arrived, stamped with the HOA seal. It announced a new Community Infrastructure Enhancement Fund, a special assessment to be levied on all residents over the next 2 quarters, ostensibly for unforeseen maintenance requirements and future stability initiatives. The amount was significant, enough to cover at least a portion of what the HOA had paid for her driveway, cleverly distributed amongst everyone. It was Evelyn's silent retribution, a way to make the community unwittingly foot the bill for Sarah's victory, and perhaps ensure no one else dared to challenge the HOA again. Sarah stared at the bill, a bitter taste in her mouth. She had won, but Evelyn still found a way to make her pay. Her frustration festered. She walked Baxter around the neighborhood, her eyes now hyper-aware. Every patch of uneven sidewalk, every faint crack in a driveway, every gurgle from a storm drain seemed to scream of the hidden danger beneath. She imagined the ancient pipe, a silent serpent, winding its way under manicured lawns and unsuspecting foundations. She saw Mrs. Peterson once again, overseeing her gardener, who was now meticulously watering the reinforced soil along her driveway edge, a gesture that now seemed less about roses and more about anxiety. One sweltering afternoon, during a particularly heavy rainstorm, Sarah watched from her window as water pooled excessively near old Mr. Henderson's driveway down the street. The same Mr. Henderson who Martha said had faulty pipes when the water line was replaced. The water wasn't draining properly, creating a small, murky pond at the edge of his property. It struck her then. If the large, decommissioned storm drain was indeed under the neighborhood, it would affect local drainage patterns, especially if it was collapsing or partially blocked. She called Daniel. "I know I signed the NDA," she began, "but what if the pipe is affecting other properties? What if it's a legitimate safety hazard for the whole community?" Daniel listened patiently. "Sarah, the NDA is strict. You cannot disclose the existence of that specific pipe or the details of your settlement. However," he added, a pause heavy, with implication, "that doesn't prevent you from being a concerned citizen reporting general drainage issues to the county or city public works department. You can't mention the specific pipe you found, but you can point out areas of poor drainage, sinkhole concerns, or unusual ground settlement in the neighborhood." A spark ignited in Sarah's mind. A loophole. A way to fight without breaking her agreement. "So I could, hypothetically, report general concerns about the stability of the ground in Willow Creek, particularly after heavy rains?" "Hypothetically, yes," Daniel confirmed. "It's their job to investigate, and if their investigation uncovers the pipe independently, that's not on you." The next day, Sarah became Willow Creek's anonymous concerned citizen. She created a burner email address and started meticulously documenting every instance of standing water, every subtle dip in the pavement, every hairline crack she observed in the community's common areas and, cautiously, near her neighbors' properties, especially those whose driveways seemed older or more worn. She took discrete photos, logging dates and times, noting the exact locations. She compiled it all into a detailed, seemingly innocent report, and sent it, with a polite but firm tone, to the county's public works and infrastructure departments. The subject line read, "Concerns regarding drainage and ground stability in Willow Creek Estates." She didn't mention her driveway or the HOA or Evelyn Albright. She just reported facts, observations that any diligent resident might make. She became an observer, a quiet sentinel, meticulously building a case that would, she hoped, eventually force the county to do what the HOA refused to: acknowledge and address the hidden threat. Days turned into a week. She received an automated reply from the county acknowledging her report. Then, another week. Silence. She began to wonder if her anonymous efforts were futile, swallowed by bureaucratic red tape. Then she saw them. Not the HOA maintenance van, but official county vehicles. A large white public works truck, emblazoned with the county seal, and a smaller, unmarked sedan. They were slowly patrolling the streets of Willow Creek, pausing at locations Sarah had specifically flagged in her report. 2 men in county vests got out carrying surveying equipment, maps, and what looked like specialized ground-penetrating radar. They walked deliberately, systematically, scanning the ground near storm drains, at the edges of lawns, and yes, even for a prolonged moment, near Mr. Henderson's perpetually wet driveway. Sarah watched from her kitchen window, a slow, vindicated smile spreading across her face. They weren't just looking at her concerns. They were actively searching. And she knew, with a certainty that thrilled her, what they were going to find. The county, unlike the HOA, had no vested interest in hiding the truth. The county workers spent 2 full days in Willow Creek, their methodical scanning patterns covering the entire area where the decommissioned pipe was marked on Sarah's old map. On the second afternoon, as they were packing up their equipment near the community park, just a few blocks from Sarah's house, she noticed a flurry of excited conversation between them. One of the men pulled out a large, rolled-up map, spread it on the hood of their truck, and began pointing emphatically. His colleague, his face grim, nodded. They looked up, scanning the surrounding homes, their expressions suddenly serious, concerned. Sarah's heart pounded. They had found something. They had found it. Later that evening, The unexpected happened. Her doorbell rang. It wasn't a neighbor or a delivery. It was a police officer, standing on her newly paved driveway, his face grave. Behind him, parked at the curb, was a police cruiser, its lights dark, but its presence unmistakable. "Ms. Jensen?" the officer asked, his voice low, but firm. "I'm Officer Miller. We received a report of unusual activity on your property, specifically from the Homeowners Association. They've raised concerns about potential trespass and unauthorized excavation near your driveway." Sarah stared at him, dumbfounded. Unauthorized excavation? Her driveway was pristine. There was no unusual activity. This was Evelyn. This was Evelyn Albright's latest, most audacious retaliation. She wasn't just fining her. She was escalating to direct police intervention, weaponizing the law against her. Officer Miller's eyes flickered past Sarah, towards her perfectly smooth, newly laid driveway, then back to her, a hint of confusion in his gaze. He clearly saw no evidence of the unusual activity described. But before Sarah could respond, another vehicle pulled up behind the police cruiser. It was a large, official-looking SUV, emblazoned with the county seal. Two figures emerged. One of them the public works official she'd seen earlier that day, his expression now overtly grim. He walked directly up to Officer Miller, holding up a clipboard. "Officer, there seems to be a misunderstanding here," the county official said, his voice authoritative. "We're from County Public Works. We've just completed a preliminary survey of this neighborhood, and we've found something far more concerning than any unauthorized excavation." He gestured vaguely down the street towards the direction of Mr. Henderson's. The county official's words hung in the twilight air, heavy with unspoken consequences. Officer Miller's face, initially etched with the annoyance of a petty HOA complaint, now shifted to a grim tableau of understanding. Evelyn Albright's tactical retreat, her weaponized fine, her desperate ploy with the police, had not only backfired spectacularly, but had detonated a truth bomb beneath Willow Creek Estates. The silent, meticulous surveillance of Sarah, the veiled threats, the punitive Community Infrastructure Enhancement Fund, all of it now seemed like the frantic flailing of a drowning person, their struggles only drawing more attention to the abyss they were trying to conceal. The immediate fallout was swift and brutal. The county official, whose name Sarah would soon learn was Marcus Thorne, didn't waste a moment. He spoke directly into Officer Miller's ear, his voice low but urgent, detailing the initial radar findings. Significant subsurface anomalies, voids, and evidence of a massive derelict structure that posed an immediate hazard. The word sinkhole wasn't spoken aloud, but it hung unspoken in the tense air. Within hours, the carefully manicured quiet of Willow Creek Estates was shattered. More county vehicles arrived, not just public works, but inspectors from the city's building and safety department, engineers, even a representative from the county emergency services. They moved with a focused urgency, their expressions grim. Large, official-looking signs began to appear on street corners. "Caution! Geological survey in progress. Avoid heavy vehicles. Residents may experience disruptions." The subtlety Evelyn Albright so prized was utterly obliterated. The core samples began the next morning. Drilling rigs, smaller than Summit Excavation's behemoths, but equally intrusive, descended upon Willow Creek. They were strategically placed, not just along Sycamore Lane, but also on Maple Street, on Oak Court, anywhere Marcus Thorne's preliminary. Scans had indicated a significant anomaly. The rhythmic thrum of the drills, boring deep into the earth, was a relentless percussion that vibrated through every foundation, a physical manifestation of the truth being dragged to the surface. Checker. Initial findings were worse than anyone, save perhaps Evelyn Albright, had truly feared. The decommissioned storm drain wasn't just a single hollow pipe. It was a labyrinthine network of crumbling, disused concrete culverts and storm drains, a relic of a bygone era's municipal planning built over decades ago with insufficient fill and haphazard structural reinforcement. The original developers, Evelyn Albright's late husband among them, had cut corners, choosing to bury the problem rather than properly remove it. Decades of erosion, groundwater infiltration, and now Summit Excavation's jarring vibration from the recent fiber optic work had caused significant sections of the network to fracture and collapse. The instability wasn't isolated to Sarah's driveway. It stretched like an underground fault line across nearly half of Willow Creek Estates. Several homes, particularly those built directly over larger sections of the network, showed signs of foundation stress, hairline cracks appearing in walls and doors that no longer shut properly. Old Mr. Henderson's persistent drainage issues, once dismissed as faulty pipes, were now understood as a direct consequence of the failing underground infrastructure. The news hit the community like a seismic shockwave. Marcus Thorne, alongside a somber-faced city engineer, held an emergency town hall meeting at the community clubhouse. The room, usually reserved for polite bridge games and equally polite HOA debates, was packed to capacity, overflowing with anxious, furious residents. Evelyn Albright, for the first time in Sarah's memory, was not at the podium. She sat in the front row, rigid and pale, her silver hair still impeccable, but her eyes darting nervously around the room, avoiding every accusatory gaze. Marcus Thorne, his voice calm but firm, presented the Geological Survey's findings with unflinching detail. He projected maps showing the extent of the compromised areas, explained the dangers of subsidence and sinkholes, and outlined the phased plan for emergency remediation. It would be massive, disruptive, and costly. Initial estimates, he concluded, gravely, suggest a multi-million-dollar undertaking to stabilize the ground and properly decommission or reinforce the entire network. This will involve significant excavation, temporary rerouting of utilities, and potential temporary relocation for residents in the most affected zones. The room erupted, shouts of outrage, cries of disbelief. Who's paying for this? How could the HOA not know? My property values are ruined. A brave, angry voice, a man from Oak Court whose foundation had just developed a worrying crack, shouted, "And what about this Community Infrastructure Enhancement Fund? We just got hit with a special assessment." Marcus Thorne looked toward the HOA board members who sat huddled, looking terrified. "That," he said, his voice sharper, "is a question best directed to your homeowners association. Our investigation revealed that the HOA, as the governing body responsible for common areas and infrastructure maintenance, would have had access to historical land records that indicated the presence of this storm drain network. Furthermore, their recent excavation work, which initiated the catastrophic failure on Ms. Jensen's property, was conducted without adequate pre-excavation geological surveys. This constitutes a severe breach of due diligence and places considerable liability on the association." As he spoke, all eyes turned to Evelyn Albright. Her composure, so meticulously maintained, began to crumble. Her face, usually serene, flushed crimson, then drained of color. Whispers rippled through the room, growing louder, turning into an angry murmur. "She knew. It was a cover-up. Our homes are in danger because of her." Martha, sitting next to Sarah, gasped. "Oh, my word, Evelyn! She knew all along." Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with betrayal. The mayor of the city, a man known for his calm demeanor, stepped forward, his voice projected through the microphone. "Let me be clear. The city and county are initiating an immediate and comprehensive investigation into the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association's knowledge and handling of this situation. We will be reviewing all HOA records, minutes, and financial statements. Furthermore, we are exploring all legal avenues to ensure that those responsible for this egregious oversight and any attempts at concealment are held fully accountable. This includes potential civil and, if warranted, criminal charges. His gaze landed squarely on Evelyn Albright. Her perfectly coiffed hair seemed to deflate, her shoulders sagged, and for the first time, Sarah saw true fear in her eyes. The Queen of Willow Creek was dethroned, her reign of iron-fisted perfection dissolving into public humiliation and the cold, hard reality of legal consequences. The next few weeks were a maelstrom. Lawsuits exploded like fireworks across Willow Creek. Residents, emboldened by the county's findings, filed class action suits against the HOA and, critically, against the original developer's estate, which included substantial assets tied to Evelyn Albright. The media descended. News vans with their satellite dishes sprouted like metallic mushrooms on the once exclusive streets. Willow Creek Estates, once a symbol of suburban tranquility, became a national headline. HOA cover-up endangers wealthy community. Evelyn Albright retreated into her fortress of a home. She was hounded by reporters, served with legal papers, and abandoned by her former allies on the HOA board, who scrambled to distance themselves from her. Mrs. Peterson, the once gossipy confidant, now avoided eye contact with anyone, her carefully reinforced rose bushes standing as silent testaments to her own quiet anxieties. Sarah, released from her NDA by Daniel due to the overwhelming public interest and the county's independent. Discovery found herself a reluctant hero. Reporters sought her out, eager for the story of the lone homeowner who dared to challenge the powerful HOA. She told her story calmly, factually, focusing not on vengeance, but on the principle of truth and safety. She explained how a simple hole in her driveway had led her to uncover a dangerous, decades-old secret. She spoke of the intimidation, the fines, the attempts to silence her. Her quiet determination resonated, turning her into a symbol of the ordinary citizen fighting against unchecked power. The HOA, under immense pressure, eventually collapsed. Its assets were frozen, its board members resigned en masse, and its power structure was dismantled, replaced by a temporary receiver appointed by the courts. Evelyn Albright was named in multiple lawsuits. Investigations revealed that the original development company, founded by her late husband, had indeed been aware of the decommissioned storm drains, choosing to build over them rather than incur the significant cost of removal. Evelyn, as a key figure in the company and later as the long-serving HOA president, was implicated in the decades-long cover-up, prioritizing the HOA's image and financial stability over the residents' safety. The final hammer blow came from the city. Citing gross negligence and a deliberate endangerment of public safety, they pursued charges against Evelyn Albright, not just in civil court, but also exploring criminal avenues for her alleged involvement in knowingly concealing the hazard. Her perfectly coiffed hair, her designer suits, her unyielding control, it all melted away under the harsh glare of the courtroom lights and the relentless scrutiny of the public. Months later, Willow Creek Estates was once again a construction zone, but this time it was